For much of the 20th century, the traditional role of women in horror films has usually been that of the helpless victim or hapless heroine. But some women have broken all the rules and given men a run for their lives. Hello, darlings. It's me, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, your glamorous guide to gal ghouls, vampire vixens, and witchy women. What? I said witchy. Oh, well. Ooh, lucky you. You're really in for a treat. I mean, besides me. We're gonna take a look at Hollywood's ultimate bad girls. They don't just kiss and tell, they kiss and kill. Our producers knew that to pay tribute to the ladies of horror, they needed a hostess who was really horrible. So they picked me, and I'm flattered, I think. We're calling our offering du jour Bride of Monster Mania. For some reason, I never get invited to weddings, although I have worked a lot of bachelor parties. You know, Bride of Monster Mania is the perfect title for the show because the audience at a horror movie is a lot like a bride on her wedding night. I mean, there's anticipation, followed by shock, terror, screaming, begging for mercy. But then when it's all over, you've had a pretty good time. And you can't wait for the sequel. Oh, our first monster brides really take that till death do us part stuff literally. And boys, you don't want to bring these gals home to meet your parents. Unless, of course, you want them killed. So put on your garlic necklace and get out your broom. We're gonna take a scary look at witches and vampires. Dream come true? Or walking nightmare? Beguiling women have had men bewitched, bothered, and bewildered since the beginning of time. And trouble has been brewing ever since. Motion pictures have always provided a safe haven for these enchanting ladies. The real world may not appreciate their devilish behavior, but at the movies, a magical evening is always welcome. Just don't get on their bad side. Vampires don't like to be crossed. And as for witches, well, these evil women give new meaning to the words girl power. As early as 1922, movie witches had begun casting their spell on the silver screen. But the first major film to portray the black arts didn't come from Hollywood. Produced in Sweden, Häxan had all the ingredients of a true spellbinder: flying broomsticks, boiling cauldrons, evil spirits, and a witch's Sabbath. Though audiences couldn't hear them cackling, it was a silent picture after all, the witches of Häxan conjured up a vivid image of ancient sorcery. The film even included a demonic seduction.
I think that the whole thing about the devil coming, I think that's a whole sexual connotation. She's seduced by the ultimate male who comes through the window, which is that adolescent hope for the elopement. And he's the ultimate seducer.
But romance between mortals and the practitioners of magic didn't have to be a ghastly affair. In 1942's I Married a Witch, Frederick March falls for Veronica Lake, a resurrected enchantress condemned to death centuries earlier by one of March's ancestors.
Now, this little witch was no ordinary witch. Oh, no, she was beautiful. But she had a terrible time making the right man fall in love with her.
I am a pretty good judge of character. I don't think you're really a bad girl.
I guess this will take longer than I planned.
Despite the family history,
But I want you to
love
know
manages to conquer all.
All right, what are you?
But was it that old black magic,
I'm a witch.
or just the blonde hair? The two ingredients certainly charmed audiences. In 1958, Hollywood whipped up a similar love potion with Belle, Book, and Candle, starring James Stewart and Kim Novak.
You're supposed to take this liquid and you paint it on an image or a drawing or a photograph of anybody that you want, and then you set fire to it and shoo, they gotta come to you.
Now you believe it.
Of course I don't believe it, not one single stupid word of it.
Chef.
I'm getting out of here, out of this building, and don't think I'm ever coming back, because I'm not coming back, ever.
You will, you have to.
Oh, you mean the spell? Ha! We'll see about the spell. Taxi! Taxi!
The film even inspired the hit TV series Bewitched. But not every screen witch had a heartwarming agenda. 2 years later, Italian director Mario Bava painted a far darker portrait of the supernatural with Black Sunday. Starring Barbara Steele, this 1960 Gothic tale of witchcraft and Satanism shocked audiences with its graphic violence. A young woman, executed for being a witch, returns centuries later to exact her revenge on mankind.
There are those who believe and those who do not. But both must know the suspense, the shock of meeting the living dead and of bringing the dead to life.
It is I who renounce you, and in the name of Satan, I place a curse upon you.
While undeniably horrific, the film managed to work in a subtext of compelling sexuality. Steele's kiss may have spelled certain death, but to young men in the audience, it almost seemed worth it.
I think it's that dichotomy. You have this beautiful, alluring, sensual, charismatic creature who suddenly is capable of these horrible things. And I think there's a real appeal in that. It pushes the right buttons on people and can make that even scary for an audience, because you sort of let your guard down. You let your guard down and you let yourself be taken in, and suddenly from left field, there's this creature.
But beneath the surface, the mythology of witches and vampires was really about seduction, both sexual and spiritual, which explains its popularity at the height of the Victorian era. In 1897, famed artist Philip Burne-Jones's painting, The Vampire, shocked British society with its lurid portrayal of a female predator. That same year, author Bram Stoker brought the living dead of Slavic folklore into modern literature with his classic novel, Dracula. Then in 1931, Hollywood decided to bring Dracula to the silver screen. The film's complex blend of dark and sexual themes fascinated audiences.
This is Dracula, the man who lived after death, lived on human blood, took the form of a vampire bat, and lured innocent girls to a fate truly worse than death.
Dracula? Oh, what's he done to you, dearie? Tell me.
He came to me. He opened and extended his arms, and he made me drink.
But it was Dracula's wives that had the men's pulses racing.
He's come back.
A sequel, Dracula's Daughter, followed 5 years later, continuing the family bloodline.
Sander, look at me. What do you see in my eyes?
Death.
This time, the female vampire took sustenance from both men and women.
Do you like jewels, Lily? This is very old and very beautiful. I must show it to you. Please don't come any closer.
Dracula's Daughter was originally going to be about Dracula and his daughter. Dracula was originally going to be a central character in it. But then, for reasons that no one is entirely clear on, they wrote Dracula out. And that made a female vampire, for the very first time, the center of the story.
Bringing a female monster into a movie changes the tone and feeling. I think it makes it more dangerous. I think it kind of like somehow ups the ante, because women shouldn't be monsters, so they're far more threatening and far more scary.
Of course, female vampires appealed to audiences of both sexes. For men, it was an opportunity to enjoy surrender without moral restrictions. For women, the vampire represented sex without guilt. After all, the creature's bloodlust was created through no fault of its own.
Witches aren't necessarily picked, but vampire women, they're picked by the ultimate sexual being. And he chooses. He doesn't choose ugly women. He chooses these beautiful temptresses.
Films like Dracula's Daughter and Todd Browning's Mark of the Vampire, produced in 1935, sparked controversy that resulted in greater censorship. Suddenly, the horror film genre was in danger of losing its bite, or at least its audience. By the mid-1930s, film censorship was in full swing, both in the US and abroad. For several years, Hollywood's screen sirens retreated to their coffins, waiting for society's sexual mores to catch up. It was in France that the wake-up call was sounded. In 1960, director Roger Vadim created the most provocative vampire movie to date, Blood and Roses. Based on Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, this atmospheric thriller explored the affair between a lady vampire and her female victim.
Blood and Roses, the ultimate in adult and unadulterated horror. Bursting onto the screen in the most lavishly beautiful, sensationally shocking picture of modern times. A girl whose secret is reflected in an image too dreadful for the eye to behold.
Female vampires are extremely popular, and female lesbian vampires are even more popular. The whole idea of a vampire to begin with is very sexual and very sensual. The penetration, the teeth through the neck, the seduction, the allure, this kind of thing. That's very much of a turn-on to a lot of people, and it can make some great stories.
But the French weren't the only ones with a taste for the erotic. The British company Hammer Films specialized in low-budget shockers that blended horror and eroticism. 1960s, The Brides of Dracula transplanted the Dracula theme to the unusual setting of a girl's dormitory. With its implicit suggestion of sexual awakening, the matinee movie was perfect for its target audience of teenage boys.
I think the reason that sex is so prevalent with female monster movies is that historically men were more attracted to horror movies. And one of the things that interests men about women is that kind of sexual game playing.
Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Hammer scored hit after hit thanks to a winning formula of hot blood and surging hormones.
Hammer had their own style. It was macabre, and it was Gothic, and it was rich, and it was silly, and there were a lot of things. Whereas the horror films later became sort of like, chop 'em. And it was so graphic. Horror films are much more exciting and scary when you don't see a lot of gore, when you don't see a lot of chopping and guts.
Hammer Films treated moviegoers to a long line of female vampires, each one of them young, buxom, and frighteningly lethal.
I think in some ways a female predator is more powerful than a male, because you don't expect it from a woman. You know it's there, but I don't think one is too eager to see it.
In many female monster roles, especially the vampire, the focus tends to be very sexual. What this is saying is that the power that women have is in their sexuality. And it's basically saying that this is like this huge power that can control and dominate men and destroy the earth.
In 1970, Hammer Films began a trilogy of erotic horror classics that reflected women's growing independence. Like Vadim's Blood and Roses, the films were inspired by Sheridan Le Fanu's novel, Carmilla.
Sample, if you dare, the deadly passion of the vampire lovers.
The first installment, The Vampire Lovers, revolved around the deadly exploits of a female vampire who preyed on teenage girls.
In Hammer films, you would have the demon come and murder the girl, and then in turn she would become the perpetrator and find victims elsewhere and carry on. And I think that's why women are so strong in these films.
Released the following year, Lust for a Vampire made being undead downright inviting.
Welcome to the most exclusive finishing school in Europe, where the quest for knowledge continues long into the night.
Turn now this fresh, warm blood into a body of thy making.
Soon after, Hammer released the last, and what many consider the best, in the series. Twins of Evil starred Peter Cushing as a vampire hunter whose two nieces are drawn into the world of vampirism.
Frida, what are you doing? Nothing. Just looking. The storm is beautiful. And when the lightning flashes, you can see Karnstein Castle. Frida!
One who is dedicated to the devil and his deeds will not die by a vampire's bite, but will become one of the undead. A vampire.
The nieces, one good, one evil, were portrayed by real-life sisters Madeline and Mary Collinson, Playboy magazine's first twin centerfolds. With the women's movement gaining momentum in the 1970s, it wasn't long before female vampires demanded equal time. Although Countess Dracula had nothing to do with Bram Stoker's infamous Count, it did concern a real-life Hungarian noblewoman who killed virgins to maintain her youthful looks.
In Countess Dracula, again, the woman drove the story, but that was easy because she was the greatest serial killer of all time.
Dracula lives again in the body of a woman. Blood. The more she drinks, the prettier she gets.
Blood. Whose blood?
Who is the bloodthirstiest of them all? The Countess Dracula.
For nearly 2 decades, Hammer Films had a lock on the vampire movie. But in 1979, Dracula returned to Hollywood for a big-budget remake starring Frank Langella. Langella gave the Count an erotic sensuality that no woman could resist.
Papa.
Laat mij maîtresse!
But Dracula was not the only literary creation of author Bram Stoker. His final novel, The Lair of the White Worm, inspired Ken Russell's 1988 shocker by the same name. A cult film, both in terms of its movie audience and its subject matter, Lair starred Amanda Donahoe as Lady Sylvia Marsh, the sultry high priestess of a supernatural cult that worshipped an ancient, worm-like dragon.
I shall tell you why you must not be afraid to die. To die so that the god may live is a privilege, Kevin. And if you know anything at all about history, you will know that human sacrifice is as old as Dionin himself.
Lair of the White Worm took the notion of vampire eroticism to its most Freudian extreme yet. Like most evil sirens, Lady Marsh came to an untimely end. But till then, she had a devil of a good time. Besides, in the world of horror, being dead is never the end. Sometimes, it's only the beginning.
Mirror, mirror in my hand, who is the sexiest? Oh, hi. Just admiring my reflection in the mirror. Something those vampire chicks can't do. Boy, being a vampire really sucks. I mean, it's just not natural.
Speaking of which, our next crop of cuties is anything but natural. They're the man-made synthetic women of horror movies. And I'm not just talking about collagen and silicone. No, sir. These gals are built from the grave up. From the dawn of existence, men have dreamed of finding the perfect companion. Most would agree that women come pretty close, with just one little problem. They have a mind of their own. And as every woman knows, men like to be the ones in charge.
Okay, with regard to the notion of men seeming to like to create female monsters, what's that about? Boys like to build things. Boys are into projects. They like to create things that they control. They like to create a project that works the way it's supposed to work.
It's a total control thing. It's, I can shape and design and make this exactly what I want it to be. And that exemplifies the attitude of the oppressor, that, you know, I'm in a position to be in charge and in control of all this and all these people.
Perhaps the first movie to feature an artificially constructed female was Fritz Lang's Metropolis. A masterpiece of the silent era, this 1927 film painted a dark, expressionistic vision of the future. One of its highlights was the creation of a female robot. The mechanical female is made in the exact likeness of Maria, a beloved and trusted figure among the working class. But her true purpose is to betray those around her. Although she's just following her programming, the actions of this synthetic siren lead to death and destruction. The haunting performance by actress Brigitte Helm as the robot made a lasting impression on future Frankenstein director James Whale. When casting Bride of Frankenstein a decade later, Whale considered Helm for the title role. The worldwide success of Frankenstein in 1931 had audiences clamoring for more, and Whale's sequel is still considered one of the best monster movies ever made.
Dr. Frankenstein decides, you know, I'm going to make a woman because I can make both. So that's that very narcissistic attitude that I'm godlike and that I can do these things.
The heart is beating more regularly now. Yes, it's been beating for 9 hours. And the brain, perfect, and already in position. Then we are almost ready. Almost. Remove the diffuser bands. She's alive! Alive!
Released in 1935, The Bride of Frankenstein was drawn from episodes in Mary Shelley's 19th century novel and derived its visual inspiration from Metropolis. Elsa Lanchester, who played the female creature, even modeled much of her performance after that of Brigitte Helm.
Stand back! Stand back!
The Bride of Frankenstein was a sensation at the box office. But despite its success, the ladies of horror had all but disappeared by the 1940s. With the male population going off to war, America came to depend on women to fulfill roles traditionally held by men. Now the ones specializing in science and mechanics weren't men like Dr. Frankenstein. There were female welders, female machinists, even female truck drivers. America gave these mechanically minded women a name, Rosie the Riveter. But Rosie found movies in which females were constructed by men to be less than riveting. That was a male fantasy. But by the 1950s, the boys were back in town, and Hollywood's women of horror were making a comeback.
He held these beautiful maidens captive in his jungle of death, a power-mad genius who changed them into horrible creatures of another world, half-beast, she-demons.
Drive-in theaters gave the monster genre a real shot in the arm. After all, what better place and what better excuse for a guy to put his arms around a date?
All young men take young women to horror films because they go, ah, and they sit on them. Don't let me go. Hold me. I've done it. We've all done it. I mean, God, yes, you know, it's wonderful.
1958's Frankenstein's Daughter gave moviegoers one of the manliest-looking female monsters in the history of cinema. Apparently, no one had told makeup artist Harry Thomas that the creature was supposed to be a lady. At the last moment, lipstick was added to give the monster a feminine touch.
For the first time, a female descendant of the infamous Frankenstein, deadlier, more terrifying than ever before.
In 1962, The Brain That Wouldn't Die featured a beautiful woman's severed head as the object of horror.
Let me die. I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
Yes, and what of her soul? How can you make of her an experiment of horror?
Horror has its ultimate, and I'm that.
But as the decade progressed, the monster film genre was in danger of descending into pure camp. That is, until the Shockmasters at Hammer Films brought it back from the dead with 1967's Frankenstein Created Woman.
Frankenstein's most terrifying experiment comes to life. Frankenstein Created Woman. Within her, a dead man's revengeful urge to kill.
Kill him. Kill him. Kill him, Christina.
Hammer was at it again in 1971 with Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, a twisted adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson's classic novel.
At first I laughed. You know, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, they were ridiculous. Of course I have to do that film. And then I thought, that's really interesting because it's male-female. And everyone has that. And how do you balance that? And it was really interesting.
This is the testament of Dr. Henry Jekyll. Male. Male. Male.
In this spine-tingling gender bender, not only is Hyde a female, but she is driven to murder women to feed her hormonal imbalance.
They must be female. No more than 20 years old.
And of course, basically what it is sort of, you know, coming to terms with the power of your body and the power of sexuality at that moment. And it was a really great moment for me. I mean, I love doing that.
In this film, you will actually see the sinister Dr. Jekyll change in mind and body into the totally evil Sister Hyde.
It is I who exist, Dr. Jekyll, not you. It is I who will be rid of you.
As I come into being once more, I start to feel my power. This is like the second or third time, and that's when I start to discover my power in sexuality and my power in life and my power in being a woman, and suddenly it's like, and I don't want to go back. I don't want to disappear again.
Dr. Jekyll,
stepsister hide? Man or woman or both?
The Stepford Wives, about what men can do behind closed doors.
In 1975, the concept of the man-made woman hit closer to home with the Stepford Wives, in which suburban husbands conspire to create the perfect partners by replacing their wives with androids who are literally built to serve.
I'll just die if I don't get this recipe. It took me so long to get the upstairs floor to shine.
Charmaine's changed. Carol Van Zandt's changed.
I'm getting the
hell out of Stepford.
Bobby, it's gotten to you now. I just want to look like a woman. And you're not going to leave Stepford either, are you? Leave Stepford?
She's changed. And stop telling me I'm crazy.
You see somebody, you get some help. You see a psychiatrist.
I think the men in the association are behind it.
Charmaine changed. Bobby changed. And my time is coming. I want my children!
Where are they?
The 1990s saw a resurgence in movies that blended modern science with classic horror. In an age of genetic engineering, the prospect of creating the perfect woman had achieved a terrifying new dimension. In 1995, Species introduced audiences to the most physically perfect female yet, a laboratory-grown superwoman whose DNA was literally out of this world.
We decided to make it female so that it would be more docile and controllable.
More docile and controllable, huh? Well, I guess you guys don't get out much.
I think what's most interesting about the movie Species is that nobody expected that, you know, a woman creature would be like this kick-ass warrior type of being. And the fact of the matter is that women really are far more vicious when protecting their young than men would ever be. That's portrayed in Species to its full extent.
From silent spectacle to state-of-the-art sci-fi, movie scientists have never stopped trying to build the perfect mate.
She's alive! Alive!
Now, I don't mean to be catty, but some of those women should have gotten a second opinion before they used Frankenstein as their plastic surgeon. I mean, I know he's cheap, but look at his work! Oh, but seriously, it's not what's on the outside that counts. It's what's on the inside. Unless, of course, what's on the inside is Satan. Yep, I'm talking about women possessed. Gals, it could happen to you.
As long as there have been souls, mankind has been fascinated by the concept of a woman overcome by the forces of evil.
From Haiti, the sinister power behind the White Zombie.
In White Zombie, Bela Lugosi plays a man obsessed with turning living people into zombies.
What is it?
I see death.
Madam.
Mad with power, he uses the strength of his will to turn a young woman into a soulless creature.
Never eyes so evil, never powers so potent, never magic so black as the master of the White Zombie.
Cinema's most famous foray into the world of possession came in 1973 with William Friedkin's The Exorcist. Based on a documented case, the film starred Linda Blair as an innocent girl possessed by the devil.
Somewhere between science and superstition, there is another world. The world of darkness.
Look, your daughter doesn't say she's a demon. She says she's the devil himself.
The one hope the only hope. The Exorcist.
I think the reason that the little girl in the movie The Exorcist struck such a chord with the public is, first we're allowed to identify with her as this little girl, and then this beast, kind of like from within, takes over and is communicating through her and changes and distorts her. It is showing this strange thing that happens in adolescence that is just really perplexing and frightening.
Following in The Exorcist's demonic wake was another tale of possession, Beyond the Door. This time, mother, not daughter, was the unwilling recipient of the devil's attention.
Who are you? Who are you?
George, please help me. Free me. Do something for me, George, please. Come on, you filthy pig.
In spite of this story change, the film bore an eerie resemblance to The Exorcist. Another film featuring a fiendish female was Brian De Palma's Carrie. Starring a young Sissy Spacek, the movie taught a whole generation of teens to think twice about teasing the high school nerd.
It's the night of the senior prom. The Bates High School gym is alive with excitement. And everybody is there, even Carrie White. The girl no one likes and everyone makes fun of. The girl who lives in that creepy house with her crazy mother. The girl with the strange power. But tonight, no one will laugh at Carrie. She's with the best-looking boy in the senior class. She'll be voted Queen of the Prom. For Carrie, it will be a dream come true. For everyone else, it will be a nightmare. Carrie, starring Sissy Spacek, Piper Laurie, and introducing John Travolta in his first motion picture role. If you have a taste for terror, you have a date with Carrie.
Carrie's transformation from prom queen to Hellraiser reflected the changing attitude by Hollywood toward female adolescents.
Adolescents, especially females, are really scary at that time because that's when they're truly switching over from being kind of androgynous to being women. They're starting their menses, and that's when they start to become possibly more of a threat. Before that, they were kind of like boys, but then all of a sudden, no, they're not. They're those women. They're those monsters.
The female powers unleashed in Paul Schrader's Cat People explore the mythical connection between the female and the feline. Based on a chilling 1942 movie, this 1982 remake starred Nastasia Kinski as a young beauty confounded and frightened by her budding sexuality. And with good reason. Half human, half cat, Kinski's character was condemned to turn into a murderous panther.
Again, it's that sexuality that sort of overrode the horror of it, you see, because there's this beautiful predator woman, and so what if she's killing everyone? They just want to just watch. You know, there's a certain sort of voyeurism involved here, watching the sexual predator.
All these ladies had a connection with the supernatural that gave them a lethal advantage. Yet it also proved to be their downfall.
Sheesh. You know, those possessed women are like something you'd see on Jerry Springer. I tell you, we have seen a lot of weird, wicked women so far. Women who are freaks of nature, women who are freaks of science, women who are into Satan, women who have Satan into them. I mean, what's left? Oh yeah, women from outer space. Hey, geez, wow, women drivers. touch the hair.
Cinema science fiction has traditionally been a male domain made up of laboratories, launch pads, and ships to outer space. But female aliens have proven a notable exception. The feminine mystique, teeming with danger and intrigue, has long provided the perfect aura for an otherworldly creature. In the 1950s and 60s, despite the threat they posed to life as we know it, these intergalactic space ladies regularly showed up in bathing suits, tights, and even leather. In the 1953 film Catwomen of the Moon, a maiden voyage by a group of astronauts turned out to be more than they'd bargained for.
Theirs is the fevered fury of life without love, goading them to lure men into the den of bloodthirsty moon monsters, flaming into a wild lust to conquer man and destroy the world.
But one didn't have to visit the moon to find a beautiful space vixen. Some female aliens found their way to Earth.
We saw this with our own eyes, an object the like of which we had never seen before. A frightening, strange shape descending from outer space with relentless purpose. Where did it come from? And what did it want of us?
Hello! It's an aircraft, all right, but like nothing I've ever seen before, huh?
1954's Devil Girl from Mars gave moviegoers a feminine reworking of the day the Earth stood still.
Do not try to follow me. You cannot get help. Around this house, I've drawn an invisible wall through which no one may pass.
Another outer space interloper found her way to our planet in 1957's The Astounding She-Monster.
Here is a power that frightens the deer in the forest. A woman so intriguing that her face and figure fascinate every man. The woman whose warmth consumes.
Other efforts took their femme fatales more seriously. The 1966 film Queen of Blood featured a vampire vixen whose appetite for blood had lethal consequences.
Queen of Blood. A tantalizing, mystifying enigma.
But nowhere was the developing image of the tough woman more evident than in Ridley Scott's sci-fi shocker, Alien. Released in 1979, the film co-starred Sigourney Weaver as Lieutenant Ellen Ripley. Alien broke new ground, both visually and as proof positive that female characters could be much more than mere victims in a horror film.
I think what you're seeing with Sigourney Weaver in Alien is you see the crossover of female power being expressed from sexuality to just real power, leadership power, being able to take charge and take control in a direct, no-nonsense way. In the 1986 sequel, Aliens, Lieutenant Ripley returns, tougher than ever. Now, she takes on the screen's most fearsome creature yet. The Alien Queen. The fight that ensues is a clash seldom seen on film. Two female characters locked in a savage battle to the death.
That monster was just, I mean, so ferocious, and you don't even think about the queen as female until you see her in all those pods. She's doing her job. She's protecting her babies. The film is very matriarchal, and I think that's what makes that whole series very, very powerful.
Get away from her, you bitch!
Ripley defeats the Queen, but not the alien race. Ripley's fight-to-the-death mentality is once again called into action when she is faced with an even more sinister alien creature in the terrifying third installment, Alien 3.
I have one inside of me. I saw it on the CAT scan. It's a queen. An egg layer. You can make thousands more like the one we've got here.
When Ripley discovers that the alien has embedded itself in her womb, she kills herself to save the human race. In Alien Resurrection, Ripley is reincarnated when her DNA is blended with that of the alien.
That was a really interesting blend. It was really hard to tell where the human left off and the monster began. Then there was a question of, well, is she going to, behave like a familiar human female is going to behave, or is she going to turn on us?
The alien queen mates with Ripley and produces one of the most horrifying creatures in movie history. Once again, Ripley must commit the ultimate act of battle. She sacrifices her hybrid offspring to stop the alien race forever. From witches and vampires to robots and aliens, female monsters have brought us some of the most terrifying moments in movie history. As women's role in society continues to evolve, one thing remains certain: that for all of their beauty, sensuality, and intelligence, women can be deadlier, more devilish, and more devastating than men. You know, there are some important lessons to be learned from the Bride of Monster Mania. First off, we now know that guys really go for the bad girls, even if it kills them. But more important than that, we can feel a lot better about ourselves. I mean, even on our worst bad hair day, we still look better than that Bride of Frankenstein. That's why, in the future, we can look forward to more, even scarier horror femme fatales. So, until next time, darling, this is Elvira saying, unpleasant dreams.